Honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker today, and I have to give a little bit of background about his education. Dr. Willie Parker will be speaking to us. He got his MD from University of Iowa, MPH from Harvard, and then did a residency at University of Cincinnati in OBGYN, and then joined the faculty there at University of Hawaii, and for 12 years was providing the full spectrum of women's health care, but then had an epiphany and decided it was time to really focus on family planning. So he went to University of Michigan and completed a family planning fellowship in 2008, and that's when I first got to know Willie. He's had a remarkable career and numerous awards, but one of the biggest is Planned Parenthood's highest award, the Margaret Sanger Award, which he received in 2015. So, as you know, clinics across the country, mostly in the South, have been closed because of TRAP laws. Many had to limit their services to the great difficulty of finding physicians who are willing to provide services in those clinics. And in response, Willie decided to travel regularly to these extremely vulnerable sites. He's one of the few doctors performing abortions in Alabama, and also works regularly at the one remaining abortion clinic in Mississippi in Jackson. Recently, he took the additional personal step of moving to Birmingham so he could more consistently serve those patients in that region. When he enters the clinics, protesters call him out by name. They shout epithets that I'm not willing to repeat in civil company. But rather than cower, Willie loudly and proudly proclaims his commitment to providing abortions in the most challenging places in the country. He's publicly demonstrated his passion for this work in several venues. As you may know, he was the focus of the documentary Trapped, describing the forced closings of clinics across the South. In his TED Talk, he describes the confluence of his deep Christian faith and his commitment to providing abortions. And he further expands on those concepts in this book that he recently wrote and will be available in April called Life's Work, A Moral Argument. Many abortion providers are frightened to do this important work, and some have stopped altogether. Most have gone to great lengths to hide their identities. In contrast, Willie is standing up for this important work and the women he serves, and speaks out in the most public of settings. All of us in this room support a woman's right to abortion care. Many of us work directly to provide those services, and some personally provide abortions. There's only one person, however, in the room who bravely and publicly cares for women seeking this legally protected, at least for now, important medical service in the most challenging parts of the country. So it is my great honor and privilege to introduce one of the nastiest men I know, our speaker today. Please join me in a warm Portland welcome for Dr. Willie Parker.
Thank you so much. As Matthew McConaughey, he said in one of his movies, all right, all right, all right, all right. It's a privilege to be here and to be introduced by a person that I admire greatly, Mark Nichols. As you can see, I admire him to the point of mimicking his bow tie swag and his hairdo. Mark, I finally figured out the existential meaning of being bald. I think the Creator made only so many perfect skulls, and then at the right time in history, decided to unveil them. So I point to Mark's head and I say, "Behold." So I'm elated to have the invitation. Planned Parenthood brought me here. They've set it out. They've taken good care of me. Thank you very much. And being in Alabama, you know, there's a lot to look around and see, to ask why. And it's always great to go to a state where you can look around and see what is, and then you can ask, when you go home, why not? Why can't we have a governor who's down for Planned Parenthood? Why can't we have people who are committed to the dignity, health, and well-being of women? So thank you for being a grand example of what I can wish for when I go home. I know that we're reeling from the outcome of this week, let alone the outcome of this election. I was talking to the governor, and it's starting to feel like we're living in dog years. It's only been a week, but every day seems like 3 years. And so when I woke up that Wednesday morning, the 9th, the day after the election, and realized what the results were, my Christian brain remembered the words of Job, where he said, "That which I feared greatly has come upon me." But my Amy Winehouse part of my brain said, "What kind of fuckery is this?" Now, they have me on a clock, so bear with me. I know that's bad language, but if you're more offended by that terminology than about the obscenities that are happening in the form of executive orders to rescind the rights of us as citizens, then you need to recalibrate your sensibilities. I know many of us are angry, we're bewildered, and as your CEO said, some of us are scared as the Trump administration makes good on their promises. As Denny Green, the football coach, once said, they are who they told us they were. They're doing exactly what they said they would do. You know, they are acting as if representative government is not what happened on the 20th, a transition of the CEO of the country. They're acting as if it was a coronation and that Donald Trump was crowned king, but we still live in a democracy. And so we still he works for us and we don't work for him. And so while many say that he's not their president, he is my president, and he's going to listen to me because I'm going to be on his ass every time he steps out of line with regard to human rights. So he's my president, and he will be hearing from me. Now, I know that many people in this room, especially as parts of Planned Parenthood, worked harder than anybody to achieve the political outcome that we want, and we wanted a different election result, but it didn't happen. And so I'm sure, like everybody else, when I received this invitation well over a year ago and I drafted my remarks, I was drafting them in the context that I would be speaking to an audience in the context of having Hillary Clinton as president. I'm sad to report that that's not the case. And so along with that, I feel some of the devastation that you feel. But what I want to offer you is a different perspective. I decided that what I want to say to you today didn't require me to change my remarks, maybe a couple of details, but my remarks that I want to share with you are still fitting. And I promise that by the time I'm done, I convince you that I'm not a Pollyanna type person, that I haven't been smoking or drinking anything to alter my consciousness. But I want to tell you that I think that what we're in is the midst of an opportunity. Now, I once saw someone write on a blackboard with chalk, that's how long ago it was, the following sentence: opportunity is N-O-W-H-E-R-E. And the person then asked us to punctuate and to space that sentence, that phrase, to give it meaning. So the first person placed a period at the end of the sentence, and it simply read, opportunity is nowhere. The second person put a space between the W and the H, and then it read, opportunity is now here, to imply that this present moment provides an opportunity. But the third person placed a period between the W and the H and a period at the end of the phrase, so that it then read, opportunity is now, here, period. And of those three phrases, that was the one that spoke to me the most because it captured the notion that in the given situation that you're in, no matter that you didn't choose it or you don't want to be there, if you look hard enough, there's opportunity to be had. And I want to argue today that we have an opportunity as progressives, not as a third-party, big P progressive in name, but in terms of progressive political action, we have an opportunity to build a movement that is sustainable, that will ensure that all the things that we care about happen and that they happen on a consistent basis. So if you'll stick with me to the end of my talk, I promise to make the case for now is as good a time as any to do the things that we want to do. But I think it's going to depend on how you punctuated that phrase that I told you about. Is opportunity nowhere? Is opportunity now here? Or is opportunity now and here? Going to Mississippi, if I don't, who will? That's the title of an article that I wrote for the National Partnership for Women and Families a few years ago, but it was also the question that I asked myself when I was asked to come to Mississippi and I visited the Jackson Women's Health Organization that you heard about earlier. I first did that in August of 2011. And Jehu, or the name that clinic goes by, is also known as the Pink House because it's the only pink abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi. In fact, it's the only clinic in Mississippi, and I would argue that it's probably the only pink abortion clinic in the country. But my visit there occurred about 3 months before they were able in that state to defeat a personhood amendment, as well as about 5 months before the current sitting governor took office only to declare that he was intent on making Mississippi an abortion-free state. Now, after becoming an abortion provider full-time on the day that Dr. George Tiller was assassinated in 2009, it was coincident in that I had already made my decision to move over to Planned Parenthood after serving as the Director of Family Planning for a hospital in D.C. I started providing care in different cities around that time after 2 years as the Director of Planned Parenthood. And I was matched with the state of Mississippi and asked, given that I was willing to travel, if I would come and consider working there. So my first answer was no. And my second answer was, hell no. Because I had seen Mississippi burning one too many times, and I just recall thinking as I drove the back roads of the northeast corner of Mississippi on my way to Iowa, that I remember as black people would travel back in the day, they would travel at night because they didn't want any incidental contact with racist white people because they never knew how that was going to end up. I just remember at night thinking that the trees were too tall and the nights were too dark. But I decided that if I was going to say no, that I at least needed to go and see what the opportunities were. So I visited that clinic, met the staff there, most of whom were African-American women who were veterans of the civil rights movement, but who had shifted their focus to working on reproductive issues. And when I met those women and saw their commitment to the women of Mississippi, one of the poorest states in this country, in my gut, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. So I started working there, and I've been working there since. You know, it's been said that when you wrestle with your conscience and you lose, you actually win. And so almost 15 years ago, I lost that battle of conscience while a faculty member in the OBGYN department at the University of Hawaii. Having moved there to work, I was in my dream job in a dream place. I had a condo overlooking the ocean. I had colleagues that I love and admire to this day. I was, as they say, chilling. But having grown up in Alabama, in my opinion, the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, I was raised Christian and had a traditional understanding about Christianity in terms of it from a fundamentalist standpoint, and I was a Protestant, born-again Christian at the age of 15, and even spent time in the pulpit as a lay minister. And what that meant for me was that while I didn't receive any explicit teaching that abortion was wrong, it was sort of implied that if a woman became pregnant, that she would continue that pregnancy. And oftentimes that was the case even if they were single or they were a teen and they were in the position to parent, they were still expected to continue that pregnancy. So while I'm sure that there were women who had abortions, I knew nothing about it because that was just not a public conversation. This was pro-life, pro-choice dynamic. And so while I was never taught explicitly that abortion was wrong, as a Christian, I decided to err on the side of not providing that care until I was clear about what it would mean to me to provide it. And so that meant that I was on a path of having to clarify what it meant to me to be a women's health provider as an OBGYN, encountering on a regular basis women who had unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or wanted but lethally flawed ones. And so after a 12-year-plus wrestle with that, just as my inability to provide that care was related to my particular religious and Christian understanding, my epiphany or breakthrough to provide that care had to come through the similar path. And for me, that path and that breakthrough came while listening to a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King. Most people know that sermon as the Mountaintop Sermon because it was the one he preached on April 3rd, 1968, the day before he was assassinated on the 4th. And while many people have heard the part about the mountaintop, when I listened to that sermon, there's another part that created an epiphany for me. In that same sermon, Dr. King also used the story of the Good Samaritan to explain why, in his opinion, what made the Good Samaritan good, in order to illustrate the shared value of mutual concern about your fellow human being. And so he took the story of what we now know colloquially as the Good Samaritan, and he talks about a traveler who had been injured in a robbery, and everyone in that community passed that person by out of fear of what might happen to him. A person who wasn't from the community, who became known as Samaritan, stopped, provided aid to that person, and then went on his way. And Dr. King said that what made the Good Samaritan good was, whereas everyone else asked, what'll happen to me if I stop to help this person? The Samaritan asked, what'll happen to this person if I don't stop to help? And for me, that hit me right in the gut as someone taking care of women, and it prompted me to ask myself the question, how can I call myself a comprehensive women's health provider if I don't provide the service that 1 in 3 women will need in this country by the time they're age 45? So that sermon impressed upon me not only the importance of not only was it right for me to be more concerned about what happens to my patients for providing this care than about what might happen to me for providing it, it became a sense of mission and calling. And whereas many of my colleagues have to become comfortable with the idea of providing abortions when they figure out what it's about, I became uncomfortable not providing abortions when I knew what women faced. And so in essence, I was afraid not to live my values. I can deal with the idea that someone might try and harm me for what I do, but what I don't think I could live with is the reality of knowing that I was too afraid to do what I knew was right. So in that regard, I'm a coward. In fact, I became convinced that it was morally right for me to provide abortions because of my Christian faith, not despite it, even if that meant that people who identify as Christian, who in every other situation would refer to me as their brother, choose to disparage me and to say that I can't be authentically Christian because I don't understand that tradition the way they do. So I figured it was more important. I never questioned whether or not it was right for me to take care of women. And what that meant was that I left Hawaii and went to the University of Michigan, as Mark told you, to acquire the skills to make sure that my willingness to help would never supersede my ability to help. It's one thing to want to help, but it's another thing to know how to help. And so I matched my compassion with the skill, and so as a result, since that time, I've been providing abortion care in the South. And what that's meant for me in a practical sense is that on a regular basis, I see women like the 35-year-old woman with 5 kids whose 2-year-old had recently died, who came to me at 9 weeks pregnant and said that I neither have the financial nor the emotional capacity to care for another child at this time. Or it's meant that I've seen the 12-year-old girl pregnant by her adoptive father who's brought by her mother to conceal the situation, and that young lady naively said to me that he's promised that he wouldn't do it again and that he's going to take me for ice cream after. Or the 16-year-old who was being molested by her mother's boyfriend, who came to me at 17 weeks pregnant and had her abortion the week following her perpetrator having murdered her mother for confronting him about the situation. Finally, it's the 35-year-old woman with 3 children who had breast cancer with her 3rd pregnancy. This is in the state of Mississippi. And after that delivery, had a mastectomy and then went for her reconstruction of her breast reconstruction, only to find a mass with a recurrence of her breast cancer while she was also 10 weeks pregnant. And she made the decision to have chemo so that she could be around to raise the 3 kids that she had. And so I raise these issues not to shock you, but to say, in a very real sense, this is the reality of the women having to make decisions. And so despite the allegation that women are lighthearted or nonchalant about the decisions they make and that it's optional for these women, abortion is a necessity. And that necessity became no less important on the 9th of November, despite the current plans to defund Planned Parenthood and the efforts to roll back the Affordable Care Act. These are the lives of real women, and they are worth fighting for. So I'm awake and I'm paying attention, and so I understand how easy it is for us in this present moment to lose sight of what is at stake, and that's what happens if we become demoralized by our present political reality. The stories of these women is why we have to move from anger to action. Politically, we sought oranges and we got lemons, right? But here's the thing. The question is, can we make lemonade? Don't worry, I'm not going to bust into a Beyonce move, right? But seriously, one of the things we have to take note of is the fact that from a nutritional standpoint, both lemons and oranges have vitamin C. And the question is, will we be able to, in this moment, extract something meaningful from this moment? Dr. King used to say that the time is always ripe to do right. This is our time. We were made for just this moment. Other people stepped up when it was their time. The civil rights warriors, black, white, and from every hue and from every space, that was their time, and they stepped up. This is our time. So the question is, what are we going to do? Well, let me offer you a couple of perspectives. One, let me offer you the perspective that Dr. King offered to the civil rights workers when they were dismayed about what was happening in Georgia. Dr. King was a resident of Georgia, and there was a march where the civil rights workers were totally dismayed because the governor of Georgia, the infamous Lester Maddox, who was an avowed racist and who was in the seat of power, every time there would be a civil rights progress, he would do something to set it back. And the workers said, the civil rights workers said, I'm tired of this. How can we ever get ahead with a man like Lester Maddox in the governorship? They wish they had a Governor Brown in Georgia at that time, but not everyone is so lucky. But Dr. King, they said, how are we going to get ahead? And Dr. King, in his pastoral authority, looked at them and said, the last time I checked, God had not turned this world over to Lester Maddox. And so I offer to you today, the universe and reality has not turned this country over to Donald Trump and his supporters. He has the presidency as a result of an arcane mechanism well past his time known as the Electoral College, but he does not have a mandate. 3 million people on Saturday said that he did not have a mandate. Senator Clinton received the majority of the vote, and what that vote represented to us is that the majority of people in this country approve of contraception, abortion, medically accurate sex education, and all the other things that are essential to the health and well-being of women and families. We know that the number 2 person, as you heard earlier, Mike Pence, is fanatical against abortion. And if a fanatic is a person who doubles their effort when they've forgotten their aim, then it stands to reason that a committed person has to be someone who revisits their aim, and when they're right, they have to double their effort. So women need us to be committed. We are clear about our aim, the health and dignity of women. We now have to double our effort because we're opposing fanatics. So we have to be committed to reproductive justice and fairness in this country because women need us to be just that. Another perspective I want to offer you is that of the mothers of my community, the little old grandmothers, when there would be a civil rights setback. As a little boy, I spent a lot of time with elders and caught a little bit of the wisdom just listening to them. And so when people would be disenchanted with a civil rights setback and they would complain, the older women in my community would say, "Baby, in times like these, it's always been times like these." Which is to say that we need a longer purview. There's never been a time when people who are standing for justice haven't had to fight for it. And so we need a longer purview. We need to adopt the long view that our slave ancestors did. And I say our because there's a legacy with regard to slavery of the resiliency of people who endured that harsh nature. And I say our history because slavery is as much your history as women's history as my history as a man. Because slavery is American history, and it doesn't matter that you're not the descendants of slaves. What I'm asking you to draw from is the resiliency of spirit that allowed people to endure in hard times, and we need that kind of resiliency. So slavery is as much your history, or the legacy of resilience from that is as much your history, and I ask you to draw from that. We must be willing to fight now more than we ever have. History of progress in this country has always been predicated upon people maintaining the faith and working harder from commitment when it seems that there's no reason to have optimism for the future. We need that. I ask you to remember the relationship between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because what I want to remind you of is if you weren't prepared to fight with whoever was in the White House, you were in the wrong frame of mind in the first place. I say that because even if Senator Clinton had become the president, and when we had shifted from electoral politics to the politics of governance, given that she would have been governing in the context of a conservative Congress, she would have had to make some concessions that maybe would have made some of us been unhappy about. So were we going to give her a pass and say that, you know, this is the first woman president and we have to give her some time, or were we going to stand up for what we knew was right? So I argue nothing has to change about your willingness to fight for right. We simply have a different opponent. And in fact, I would make the argument that it's easier to fight against fascism than it would have been to fight against liberalism. I'm sure that Frederick Douglass was grateful that President Lincoln became the president and not his opponent, Stephen A. Douglas, who was a strident racist and slavery supporter, even though Frederick Douglass couldn't vote. But when Lincoln was in the White House, Frederick Douglass made it clear that his goal did not change based on who was in the White House. He was willing to wrestle with whoever ended up in the seat of power, because he said that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. Those who want progress but deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. He said that the struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it will be a struggle. He also said in another place that you may not get all that you pay for, but you will certainly pay for all that you get. And that indeed is going to be our story right now, when we're working against what it seems like tall odds, but that's who we are. That's who we are as a nation. And it's the spirit of resilience that brought us out on that Saturday, and it's the spirit of resilience that filled this room and the overflow room. Hi, people in the overflow room. That spirit is what we also have to use to make demands. So here's something hot off the press. If you haven't done anything to do a deeper dive politically, that's going to be our solution. We were called to that by the governor. And there are some of us who fancy ourselves as apolitical, but the Mahatma Gandhi had a position on that. He said, if I seem to take part in politics, it's only because politics encircles us today like the coil of a snake from which we cannot get out. No matter how much one tries, I wish, therefore, to wrestle with the snake. So in electing a president, as I said earlier, we didn't elect a CEO. We have a big snake with an orange hairdo wrapped around us, and we have to wrestle with the snake. The CEO serves at our pleasure and not the other way around. We are citizens and not colonial subjects. Let us remember that. We have a president who treats the government like a big celebrity show, and we have to make him aware that we didn't sign up for his show and that we will not remember our lines. We will not play in his play. We are prepared to wrestle with this snake, and we won't relax and allow him to squeeze the life out of this country, a diverse country, a vibrant country. Our opportunity is that it will be easier to fight him than it would have been another. So that is what I mean by we have to be willing to fight versus laying down and just saying, we'll wait till next time. So as I close, what do I ask you to do? I give you permission to be dejected, but not defeated. What's the difference? Effort. Nothing beats a fail but a try. Experience is not what happens to you. Experience is what you do with what happens to you. And let us let this experience inform what it means to be politically inactive. We should say never again. Never again will there be 49% of the electorate that didn't vote, right? I was angry about this election for exactly 1 week. I figured that was enough. And so I say to you, my Oregon brothers and sisters, I will not spend the next 4 years being right about how this election should have been or could have been different. I will spend my time active. I began on the 9th of November, focusing my efforts on getting this dangerous person out of office. And I'm calling on you to do that. And I'm calling on you to realize that all politics are local. We have to shorten our election cycle, not every 4 years for the president, but for every school board, to the city council, to the governor. You have to vote every time the doors are open. So as I close, I say we have to dig in and realize that this is not about partisan gamesmanship. It's an Abraham Lincoln type of moment. It's time to save the Union. Our Union is at stake. And I know rhetorically I sound like the Tea Party, but we need a Tea Party-like effort within democratic politics. We need a progressive movement, and it starts here, and it starts now. Because we are a nation of immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ people, poor people, Caucasian people, affluent people, and as Dr. King said, science has made of this world a neighborhood, and we have to make of it a brotherhood. So as I close, let me say 3 things. Get mad, check. Get active, do something. And I want to remind you that opportunity is now, here. So let us seize the moment. Thank you very much.